From the beginning, the Soviet tank crews held a quiet confidence, almost a pride sharpened by decades of doctrine. They had grown up inside the steel bodies of T-64s and T-72s, trained to believe that no Western tank could match the raw aggression and battlefield weight of Soviet armor. When rumors reached them of a new American tank, Abrams, many dismissed it with a shrug. Some even joked about it in the smoke-filled barracks. "Another NATO toy with computer buttons, see how it burns." The officers laughed too, though more carefully. They had seen prototypes and grainy photographs, angular armor, wide tracks, an engine that looked too fragile for real war. A turbine? To the Soviet tanker's ear, it sounded like a helicopter trying to be a tank. Thus, when the first Soviet regiment assigned to observe NATO trials received orders to monitor an American exercise in the Gulf, the laughter followed them. They watched the Abrams roll off flatbeds on dusty ranges, its engine humming like some futuristic creature. To Soviet ears, it lacked the deep growl of a diesel beast. It sounded almost polite. But as the hours passed, the humor faded. One Soviet commander, Major Orlov, was the first to squint through binoculars and whisper, "It moves too fast." The Abrams accelerated across the sand with shocking smoothness, kicking up a golden cloud behind it. Most tanks shook, rattled, and lurched like armored bulls. This one glided. The Soviet specialists noted every detail. The gun stabilized even at full speed, the turret rotating with silent precision, the thermal sights picking out distant metal signatures that the Soviets could barely detect. When an American instructor officer ordered a live-fire sequence, the observers fell silent. The Abrams' main gun barked. Targets that usually took 2 or 3 shots vanished with a single round. The logs showed almost no misses. Even more unsettling, the tank fired on the move without slowing. Soviet doctrine had always accepted that a tank must stop to aim properly. The Abrams ignored this rule as if it were obsolete. Orlov lowered his binoculars and exhaled slowly. "If this thing enters a real war," he muttered, "someone is going to be surprised." His crew, standing behind him, tried to keep the mood light. "Major, American propaganda," one said. "In real war, they will hide behind their air force anyway." But Orlov didn't laugh. He watched how the Abrams commander stood half-exposed from the hatch, confident, scanning the horizon through optics the Soviets could only dream of. The machine radiated something unsettling, a combination of agility and armor that defied their assumptions. Weeks later, the war came. When the Soviets found themselves aligned with Iraqi armored forces in an advisory role, they finally saw the Abrams in true combat. The desert battlefield was unforgiving, a vast plain of dust where tank duels could stretch for kilometers. Soviet advisors rode inside Iraqi T-72 MiS, export models, far inferior to their own elite versions, yet still respected on paper. The first clash was brutal. Through the night, the horizon flashed white on Soviet thermoscopes. They couldn't see the American tanks, but they saw their shells. Impact after impact tore through Iraqi formations. Soviet crews shouted directions, trying to coordinate counterfire, but the enemy was invisible. It was Orlov who realized the horrifying truth. "They have thermals," he said, voice tight. "We don't." The Abrams hunted them like ghosts in the darkness, its thermal sights piercing dust, smoke, and night as easily as daylight. Meanwhile, the Soviet-advised crews saw only blackness. When an enemy tank finally appeared in their optics, it was usually too late. A T-72 exploded ahead of Orlov's position. The fireball illuminated the wreck for a moment, angled armor, shattered turret, smoke spiraling upward. Orlov felt the ground shake. His crew froze. "This is no joke," Orlov whispered. "This tank is something new." Soon, Soviet tankers no longer laughed at the Abrams. They feared it. The desert winds howled as Orlov's advisory detachment repositioned behind a cluster of dunes, the only cover in a battlefield that felt stretched to infinity. Smoke trails drifted across the night sky, glowing faintly from burning oil trenches. The Iraqis were panicking, their commanders yelling through radios that crackled with fear and static. Somewhere in the darkness, American armor advanced like silent predators. Orlov pressed his eye to the periscope once more. Nothing. Not a shape, not a silhouette. Only blackness. And yet he could feel it, movement, presence, the weight of machines drawing closer. The Soviet crews had fought NATO tanks in exercises, but never like this. Never blind. Suddenly, a voice from an Iraqi gunner burst through. Contact! Something moving on our left! But before anyone could pivot their turrets, a flash erupted, bright, sharp, merciless. A single American round struck the Iraqi T-72 from nearly 2 kilometers. The tank detonated as if punched from the inside, its turret thrown upward in a pillar of fire. The shockwaves slammed into Orlov's vehicle. Driver, reverse! Now! Orlov barked. The T-72M lurched backward, tracks grinding deep into the sand. Inside the metal shell, the Soviet advisors clung to whatever they could. Ammunition rattled. The smell of diesel mixed with sweat and cordite. Orlov's gunner shouted. Where do we fire? We can't see them. Use the muzzle flashes. Estimate. Orlov ordered, but even he knew how hopeless that was. The Abrams fired from distances that were almost unreal, ranges Soviet training had never fully prepared them for. Another Iraqi tank beside them fired blindly, its shells soaring off into the dark. A second later, it was hit too, clean, surgical. No wasted shots. No hesitation. The Soviet lieutenant beside Orlov gripped the handles of his periscope so tightly that his knuckles went white. Comrade Major, this is slaughter. Orlov didn't respond. His eyes were pinned to the battlefield, desperate to catch a glimpse of their enemy. Then, finally, he saw it, a faint glow on the horizon, subtle but unmistakable. The turbine flare of an Abrams. There! Orlov breathed. But before he could call out the bearing, the glow vanished. The Abrams had shifted behind cover, moving faster than he expected. The Americans were not merely attacking, they were maneuvering with terrifying fluidity. Iraqi crews, untrained in night warfare, began abandoning their tanks, stumbling into the dark with hands raised or running without direction. The Soviet radio channels filled with frantic pleas. Help us! We can't see them! They shoot from so far! Our rounds bounce! They bounce! Orlov felt a coldness in his chest. Bounce. That word haunted every tanker. It meant their best shots ricocheted uselessly off the enemy's armor. A nearby Iraqi commander ran to Orlov's halted tank, panting. Major! What should we do? My men refuse to go back inside. Before Orlov could answer, more explosions tore across the dunes. The Americans were no longer just firing, they were closing in. The ground trembled. Orlov inhaled sharply. He knew that sensation. It wasn't artillery. It was tracks, heavy ones. M1s are advancing, Orlov muttered. They want a closer engagement. The Soviet lieutenant swallowed hard. Why? They already have us beaten. Orlov gave a grim, humorless smile. Confidence. To them, this is not a risk. Through the murk, the faint silhouette of an Abrams finally appeared, its angular armor reflecting firelight, its turrets swiveling with predatory precision. The tank moved like a machine unconcerned with resistance. Orlov felt his heartbeat thudding against his ribs. Gunner! Heat round, aim center mass! We don't have a lock! Use the silhouette! Fire! The gun thundered, the entire hull shaking. The shell streaked toward the American tank. Orlov held his breath. A flash. A spark. The shell struck the Abrams, and bounced. It skidded off the composite armor like a thrown stone glancing across a river. The Abrams barely reacted. No smoke, no penetration, nothing. The lieutenant stared, stunned. That was our best shot. The Abrams answered instantly. Its cannon fired with a sound that split the air, sharp, confident, final. The round slammed into the Iraqi tank next to Orlov's vehicle, penetrating instantly. Flames shot skyward, men screaming inside. Back! Back! We retreat now! Orlov roared. His driver pushed the engine to its limit. The T-72M backed away, rocking violently as it bounced over uneven ground. But even as they retreated, Orlov could still hear the Americans advancing, methodical, unstoppable. The Soviet tankers no longer doubted. The Abrams was not a toy. It was not a fragile machine. It was not an overhyped NATO experiment. It was a new breed of tank, one that rewrote the laws they had believed in for decades. And the desert would teach them the lesson in fire. Dawn crept slowly across the desert, spreading pale light over a battlefield still trembling with heat from the night's devastation. Smoke rose from blackened hulls scattered across the dunes, their silhouettes warped by fire and twisted metal. The desert, once quiet and indifferent, now felt like a graveyard of steel. Major Orlov had not slept. His crew had retreated nearly 15 kilometers, regrouping with the remnants of the Iraqi armored division. Around him, shaken Iraqi tankers huddled in small circles, some silent, some whispering prayers, others staring blankly into the sand. Their confidence had been shattered in a single night. Even the Soviet officers, men who had trained on the best armor the USSR could build, looked haunted. Orlov climbed atop his T-72M and scanned the horizon with binoculars. The American tanks were no longer visible, but their presence felt close, as if the dunes themselves remembered their movement. His lieutenant joined him, face pale from exhaustion. "Comrade Major, headquarters wants a full report." Orlov lowered the binoculars. "A report?" he repeated quietly, as if the word tasted bitter. "What do they expect us to say? That we were blind? That we fired and watched our rounds slide off their armor? That their tanks moved as if the desert were a paved road?" The lieutenant swallowed. "They want numbers. Enemy tanks engaged. Distances. Ammunition spent." Orlov's jaw tightened. "Then write this: the enemy sees in darkness. We do not. The enemy hits at 2 kilometers. We hit at 1, if lucky. The enemy moves faster than we can aim. The enemy fires on the move while we must stop." The lieutenant hesitated. "Should we mention morale?" Orlov shook his head. "There is no morale." Behind them, an Iraqi commander approached, Colonel Karim, a stern man who had once boasted about the strength of his armored brigades. Today, he walked with a limp, dust clinging to his uniform, his eyes hollow. "Major Orlov," Karim said, "my men refuse to advance again. The Americans target anything that moves. They hit us before we can even point our guns." Orlov nodded slowly. "Your tanks are not equipped for night battles. Their optics are from the past. This is not your fault." Karim exhaled. "My soldiers say the American tanks are invincible." The Soviet officer paused. "No tank is invincible. But this one is close." The colonel stared into the distance. "If they attack at daylight, what chance do we have?" Orlov didn't answer. Instead, he resumed scanning the horizon. The sun rose higher. Heat shimmered off the dunes. And then movement. At first, it was faint. A blur. A distortion in the heated air. But Orlov knew the rhythm, the pattern, the unmistakable shape. An American column advancing in formation, not rushed, not aggressive, just precise. The way a professional moves toward a task already decided. The Iraqi forces scrambled. "Positions! Back inside the tanks!" Commanders shouted, forcing terrified crews to return to their steel coffins. Orlov slid into his own tank, sealing the hatch. The familiar metallic echo enveloped him, an echo that once felt like protection, but now felt like confinement. "Driver, move to the ridge!" "Gunner, ready sabot!" The crew responded, though their voices lacked conviction. Outside, dust clouds rose behind the Iraqi armor as they formed a defensive line. Orlov knew it wouldn't hold. Their fire control systems were outdated, their training insufficient, their morale gone. The Abrams appeared over the dunes. In daylight, the American tanks looked even more imposing. Their armor glowed under the sun, their turrets turning smoothly like watchful eyes. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. They simply advanced, methodical, confident, as if performing a routine they had practiced 100 times. Orloff's gunner exhaled sharply. Target at 1,800 meters, he said. Abrams, leading vehicle. Orloff hesitated only a second. Fire! The T-72 roared, recoiling violently. The shell streaked toward the Abrams. Orloff watched the plume, watched it strike. A sharp metallic spark. Dust kicked up. But again it bounced. The Abrams did not even slow. A second later, the American tank fired back. The round didn't hit Orloff's tank, it passed just overhead, but it struck the Iraqi tank behind him. A thunderous explosion engulfed the vehicle. Flames poured from the hatches. Men screamed inside. Orloff's driver tensed. Major, what do we do? Keep moving. Do not stop. Change position, now. They reversed toward another dune as more Abrams crested the ridge. The American formation fanned out with disciplined coordination. Their gunners tracked targets effortlessly, hitting with surgical accuracy. Each shot was quick, clean, efficient. Abrams firing again! The gunner shouted. Another Iraqi tank erupted into a fireball. The defense line collapsed. Iraqi crews bailed out of their vehicles, running across the sand. Some dropped weapons, some shouted for help, others dove behind dunes. Orloff pounded his fist against the turret interior. Stay inside! We are not abandoning this tank! His lieutenant, trembling, forced himself to monitor the rangefinder. Major, they're advancing fast. Orloff's anger shifted into grim acceptance. They know we can't penetrate them at this range. The Abrams continued their approach, steady and unstoppable. Their guns fired with eerie calm, like craftsmen completing a precise task. Orloff ordered another shot. Load sabot! Loaded! Fire! The shell fired, another spark, another deflection. The lieutenant whispered, Comrade Major, what kind of armor is this? Orloff finally said the words he had resisted for hours. Composite. Reinforced. And designed for wars we never prepared for. The Americans were rewriting the battlefield rules. The Soviets were watching their doctrines collapse in real time. And Orloff knew the worst was yet to come. The midday sun hammered the desert with relentless heat, turning the air into a rippling haze. The battlefield had become a vast canvas of destruction, burning hulks, scattered debris, trails of black smoke stretching across the horizon. The Iraqi armored line was shattered, yet the Americans continued advancing with methodical precision. Inside his T-72M, Major Orloff felt the engine vibrate beneath him, every tremor echoing through his bones. His driver wiped sweat from his brow. The temperature inside the tank felt like a sealed furnace. But none of them complained. Fear dried their throats more effectively than the heat ever could. Range? Orloff asked, his voice steady but eyes sharp. The lieutenant peered through the optics. Abrams at 1,500 meters, closing. Orloff swallowed. At this distance, their own guns were hitting the limits of effective accuracy. The Abrams, however, had no such limitation. They would fire on the move, their stabilization so flawless it turned speed into an ally rather than a handicap. Driver, angle us behind that dune. Gunner, prepare a snapshot. The driver pushed the tank forward, treads grinding the sand. Orloff knew they couldn't hold a position for more than seconds at a time. Staying still was suicide. Movement was survival, barely. Outside, an Iraqi tank tried to charge forward, turret turning wildly. It fired a sabot round that soared into the distance, missing its mark by a hopeless margin. The Abrams it aimed at responded instantly. A single shot. A precise hit. The Iraqi tank folded as if its armor were paper, flames bursting from the engine deck. The blast rocked Orloff's tank. His driver shouted, Major! That was one of ours! Yes, Orloff replied bitterly. And unless we adapt, we join them. The lieutenant shifted in his seat. Comrade Major, maybe we should fall back again. We fall back, Orloff said, and the Americans push through to the highway. If they cut the supply lines, everything collapses. He paused. We cannot win. But we must slow them. The gunner nodded reluctantly. A sudden radio transmission cut through the tension, Colonel Karim's voice, strained and panicked. All units regroup, regroup! The Americans are flanking from the west. Repeat, they are flanking. Static drowned him out. Orlov's blood ran cold. The Abrams weren't just pushing forward. They were maneuvering around the entire line. Tactical encirclement, he muttered. They're boxing us in. The lieutenant's voice cracked. Major, if they close the circle, we will not let them. Orlov opened the turret hatch for a brief moment, scanning the terrain. The sand stung his face, but he needed a clear view. In the distance, he could see the American tanks splitting into two arms, one pushing directly toward the fragmented Iraqi front, the other swinging wide to encircle. It was brilliance. Pure, disciplined, terrifying brilliance. They fight like a single mind, Orlov murmured. No hesitation. No confusion. Back inside the tank, he made a decision. Driver! Head east, full speed! Gunner! We're going to hit their flank before it closes. The crew didn't argue. They trusted him, fearfully, but fully. The T-72M lunged forward, acceleration throwing them against their seats. Dust whipped around the hull as they raced across the desert floor. Orlov glimpsed other Iraqi tanks retreating, some in flames, others abandoned. The battlefield was dissolving into chaos. The lieutenant monitored the scope. Major! 2 Abrams on the ridge, distance 1200. Orlov clenched his jaw. Gunner, take the trailing one. Aim low. Try for the track. The gunner hesitated only a moment. Firing! The tank shuddered violently. The sabot round screamed toward the Abrams, striking the ground near the treads. A cloud of dust exploded around the American tank, but as the dust cleared, the Abrams kept moving. No damage, the lieutenant whispered. Driver, swerve right! Orlov barked. The T-72M jolted sideways just as an American shot ripped through the spot they'd occupied seconds ago. The shell punched a crater into the sand, its shockwaves slamming into Orlov's vehicle like a physical blow. They are locking onto us, the gunner yelled. They already have! Orlov snapped. The T-72 swerved again, engine roaring. The crew gripped their stations as the tank sped across uneven ground, each bump threatening to throw them off balance. Orlov ordered another shot. Gunner, again! Target the joints! Loaded! Firing! Another blast. Another spark. Another harmless deflection off the Abrams armor. The lieutenant shook his head, trembling. It's hopeless. No. Orlov's voice cut sharply. We find something they don't expect. They crested a ridge, and froze. Below them lay a shallow wadi, a natural trench cutting across the desert. It was deep enough to hide a tank. Driver, down into that wadi! The T-72 slid into the trench, sand spraying up along both sides. Inside, the tank was shielded from direct sight, temporarily. Orlov's plan was desperate. We wait. We stay cold. And when they pass overhead, we fire at their underside. The underside armor of any tank, even an Abrams, was thinner. Vulnerable. The crew exchanged tense glances. It was a gamble. But it was the first advantage they had seen since the battle began. Minutes passed. Each second stretched painfully. Then, the unmistakable rumble of heavy tracks. The Abrams were approaching. Their shadows loomed above the wadi's rim. Dust fell in small cascades as their weight pressed the ground. Orlov raised his fist. Gunner, be ready. The first Abrams rolled directly over their position. Orlov whispered. Now. The gunner fired. The blast filled the wadi with thunder. The round slammed upward. A metallic scream. A plume of fire. The Abrams halted. Smoke poured from beneath its hull. Orlov's eyes widened. They had damaged it. Not destroyed, but damaged. A wound. Proof that the steel giant could bleed. The lieutenant exhaled shakily. Major, it worked. Orlov didn't celebrate. Because the second Abrams was already turning toward them. And now, they had been found. The wadi shook as the second Abrams shifted its massive bulk toward Orlov's hiding place. The sound of its turbine engine echoed through the narrow trench like a storm trapped in a canyon. Dust drifted from the earthen walls, and the crew inside the T-72M felt the vibration through their seats, an eerie reminder that something far stronger, far faster, far more advanced was hunting them from only meters away. "Driver, reverse us deeper!" Orlov barked. But the trench twisted and narrowed. The T-72M scraped against the sides, metal grinding against packed earth. They had only moments. The Abrams was repositioning, angling its barrel downward. "They're going to fire into the trench!" the lieutenant shouted. Orlov knew. No Soviet training manual prepared them for this. No doctrine explained how to survive being trapped under an enemy tank with superior optics, superior armor, superior firepower. "Gunner, load heat. Aim for the turret ring if it shows itself." The gunner swallowed. "If it angles down far enough, Major, we're done." Orlov took a breath, steadying his voice. "Then we fire faster." The rumble overhead grew louder. The Abrams' shadow widened across the wadi, blocking the sun. Its turret turned, casting a crescent of moving darkness along the trench floor. The lieutenant whispered, "It knows exactly where we are." Orlov replied, "It knows. But it does not know what we can still do." He opened the hatch slightly, enough to glimpse the rim. The Abrams loomed above like a monster forged of steel and smoke, its cannon lowering with murderous precision. "Gunner," Orlov whispered. "When I give the word, fire." Seconds stretched. The trench vibrated. The American tank tipped slightly forward as it angled to get a clear shot. Orlov slammed the hatch shut. "Fire!" The heat round blasted upward. The explosion filled the wadi with a roaring wave of fire and dust. The shock rattled the T-72 from end to end. The crew coughed through the smoke as debris rained onto the hull. "Did we hit it?" the lieutenant gasped. Dust settled. Orlov wiped the periscope lens, squinting through it. The Abrams still sat above them. But it had reversed a few meters, its turret swiveling erratically for a moment, as if adjusting after a blow it didn't expect. Smoke curled from its side where the heat round struck, but the armor held. Not pierced. Not broken. Just annoyed. The gunner swore under his breath. "We barely scratched it." Orlov's voice hardened. "We made it fall back. That is something." But their victory lasted seconds. The Abrams repositioned on the ridge. Now its barrel pointed straight into the wadi, perfectly aligned. The lieutenant stared at the incoming doom. "Major, we must move or we die." Orlov didn't hesitate. "Driver! Forward, through the trench, full speed!" The T-72M lurched ahead, engine roaring. The tank tore through the narrow channel as the Abrams fired. The American shell slammed into the wadi behind them, ripping a crater into the ground. The shockwave shook their bones. "Faster!" Orlov shouted. The trench curved, leading them out onto open terrain again, a flat expanse that offered no cover, no protection. But it offered distance. Distance was survival. The T-72 burst out of the wadi in a cloud of dust. Orlov turned in his seat, watching the ridge. The Abrams was already repositioning, starting to descend toward them like a predator following tracks in the sand. The lieutenant reported, voice trembling with adrenaline. "Major, they're moving at speed. They're coming for us." Orlov knew. The Abrams could hit targets with astonishing accuracy while moving at speeds Soviet tanks could only dream of. "Driver, zigzag! Keep changing angles!" The T-72 jolted left, then right, then sharply left again, creating a serpentine path across the desert. Behind them, the Abrams fired, missed once, hit the sand near their tail, then readjusted. "Gunner, smoke rounds, now!" The gunner launched smoke grenades. Thick white plumes erupted behind the tank, drifting upward and expanding until they obscured half the battlefield. The lieutenant exhaled. "That might buy us seconds." Seconds were enough. "Driver, head toward the ravine ahead," Orlov ordered. If we reach it, we can break visual. The driver didn't waste a breath. The T-72M barreled forward, treads kicking up sand. The roar of the Abrams grew louder behind them, too loud. They're gaining, the lieutenant warned. Faster than us. Orlov pressed his palm against the turret wall, steadying himself. Then we make the ground fight for us. They reached the ravine, steep, jagged, but deep enough to conceal their tank. The driver swung the hull down the slope. The tank slid, rocking violently, metal grinding against rock. Everyone held on as the machine clawed its way to the bottom. The ruthlessness of the descent saved their lives. An American round streaked overhead, striking the opposite ridge instead of the tank. The explosion sent boulders tumbling into the ravine, dust choking the air. They missed, the gunner breathed. No, Orlov corrected. We made them miss. Inside the ravine, the walls provided precious cover. The Abrams could not see them directly, not yet. But they could still be hunted. Orlov studied the narrow passage stretching ahead. The ravine branched, split, curved, an unpredictable maze carved by centuries of desert storms. He smiled for the first time in hours. Driver, into the left path. Quietly. The lieutenant looked at him. Major, are we escaping? Orlov's eyes narrowed, the fire in them returning. No. We are not escaping. He pointed ahead. We are ambushing. The crew stared at him. We wounded one of their tanks. We survived too. Now we show them a Soviet crew does not die running. The gunner straightened. What's the plan? Orlov's voice became steel. We will make them come down. Make them commit. And when they are trapped in this ravine, our shot will be from 20 meters, not 2,000. The lieutenant inhaled. At that distance, even Abrams' armor can break. Orlov nodded. Yes. Even giants fall when struck from below. He leaned toward the intercom. Prepare the tank. Load sabot. Engine to silent idle. The desert wind whispered across the ravine, carrying distant thunder, the sound of America's finest armor drawing nearer, unaware that they were now entering a place where advantages no longer mattered. Where the hunter could become the hunted. Silence settled over the ravine like a living thing, thick, waiting, tense. The walls rose high on both sides, jagged stone and packed earth towering above the T-72M as it sat half-hidden in shadow. Orlov ordered the crew to shut down the engine completely. The sudden stillness felt unnatural inside the tank, as though their steel machine had become a coiled animal holding its breath. Only faint sounds broke the quiet, the metallic click of the gunner adjusting his sights, the lieutenant's anxious breathing, the distant rumble of American armor approaching through the desert. Each vibration in the earth made the crew tense, imagining the Abrams rolling closer, hunting with the ruthless efficiency they had seen all day. Orlov raised a hand for silence, though no one spoke. The air inside the tank felt heavy with anticipation. Sweat ran down the gunner's cheek. Dust drifted from the ceiling hatch. Major, the lieutenant whispered, voice barely audible. What if they don't come down here? They will, Orlov replied. His voice was low, calm. Abrams' crews chase a threat until it stops breathing. They believe we are running. They believe we are afraid. The gunner allowed himself a dry smile. Are we not? Orlov answered without hesitation. We are alive. That's enough. Above them, the rumble grew louder, one engine, not two. Orlov felt the ground tremble. That is the damaged one, he said. They sent the second Abrams to flank around. But the wounded tank, it wants us. The lieutenant swallowed. Revenge? No, Orlov said. Professionalism. They want to finish what we escaped. Seconds ticked by. Then light flickered across the ravine walls, dust caught in sunbeams kicked up by massive tracks. A dark shadow passed over the entrance. The Abrams emerged careful, deliberate, sliding into the ravine like a beast entering unfamiliar territory. Its turret moved slowly, scanning. Its treads ground against the rock with heavy intent. Orlov whispered, barely a breath. Hold! The crew sat still as stone. Outside, the Abrams advanced deeper, its profile growing larger, its armor glimmering in the filtered sun. Distance? Orlov asked. The gunner murmured. 40 meters, 35. The Abrams continued forward, unaware that each meter brought it closer to the jaws of an ambush crafted from desperation and steel. Turret elevating, the lieutenant reported softly. It's checking the cliff side. Good, Orlov said. Let it look everywhere except where we are. The American tank's cannon angled high for a moment, then rotated left. Its machine gun swept the ridge line. The gunner whispered, Major, it's perfectly broadside. Not yet, Orlov murmured. The Abrams rolled another 10 meters. Now range is 20, the gunner said. Orlov closed his eyes for a brief second. A silent prayer, nothing religious, nothing poetic. Just a moment of stillness before violence. Gunner. Yes, Major? Break the giant. The cannon fired. The shot blasted the ravine with thunder, the echoes slamming off the walls like a shockwave. Rocks fell from the cliffs. Smoke flooded the air. The sabot round struck the Abrams directly beneath its turret, slamming into the thinner side armor, punching through with sheer force at point-blank range. For the first time, the giant reeled. Flames burst from the penetration, licking upward through the hull. The lieutenant gasped. Hit! Direct hit! But Orlov kept his eyes focused. Damage report? The gunner stared through the scope. It's burning, but not destroyed. Crew is still inside. The Abrams rocked, turning its turret toward them, slowly, but with lethal intent. Even wounded, the machine fought back. Load again! Orlov shouted. The gunner slammed another sabot round into the breech. The lieutenant wiped sweat and dust from his face, trembling. The Abrams turret aligned. Fire! Orlov roared. The second shot struck the lower glacis, tearing into the already compromised hull. Smoke erupted violently. Something inside the Abrams detonated, a secondary explosion. The turret jerked upward, then froze. The gunner exhaled shakily. The crew, they're abandoning it. A hatch blew open. 2 American crewmen crawled out, coughing flames and smoke behind them as they slid down the burning hull. The lieutenant whispered, Should we take them prisoners? Orlov shook his head. No. They survived. So did we. That is enough. But their moment ended abruptly. A radio transmission burst through the static. Soviet Advisory Unit, do you read? Major Orlov, respond immediately. Orlov grabbed the headset. Yes. We hear you. The voice continued. Satellite intel shows the 2nd Abrams platoon is advancing from the northwest, multiple units. They will reach your location in 3 minutes. The lieutenant's face strained of color. Major, more Abrams? Plural? The gunner whispered. We can't fight another. Not here. Not anywhere. Orlov stayed silent for several seconds. His mind worked rapidly. Options, terrain, fuel, ammunition. None offered survival. But one offered meaning. He looked at his crew. These men had followed him through terror, fire, and hopeless odds. They had struck down a machine the world believed untouchable. They had proven something, to themselves if to no one else. Orlov spoke quietly. We are done fighting. Not because we fear them, but because this battle is already history. The lieutenant frowned. Then what do we do? We withdraw, Orlov said. We leave the ravine before the others arrive. The desert is large. There are valleys farther east. We live today. We fight another time. We tell what we saw. The gunner nodded slowly. The world must know. The T-72MS engine roared back to life. The tank reversed carefully, climbing the ravine wall. Dust rolled under its treads as it crawled upward, emerging into the blinding desert sun. Behind them, the burning Abrams smoldered, its injured machine finally still, its crew kneeling nearby in surrender to the harsh desert and the relentless war. Orlov did not look back long. He whispered to his crew, Remember this day. Because decades from now, when people speak of the Abrams, they will speak of what it did here, and what we learned facing it. The T-72M rolled eastward into the shimmering horizon, scarred, battered, but alive. It was not victory. But it was survival. And survival, Orlov knew, was sometimes the only triumph war allowed.